Well, hello, world, and welcome to another episode of the Crisis Victory Show. Today, my co-host Pete Turner and I decided to spend some time and kind of reflect on the last 20 episodes that we've had on the show. We think that from time to time we should go over this material and kind of revitalize the viewers that may or may not have seen each of one of these shows. And I'm so excited that Pete talked to me about that last night. And by the way, Pete, I'd like to tell my audience also that he is the founder of the Break It Down show. It's a fabulous show. He does all kinds of topics, and we really need to see his show when you get a chance. So, yeah, if you could pop it up there real quick. Thanks, Pete.
Yeah, there's the link right there.
So today what we're going to do is we're going to go over, we've had 21 episodes since the day that we opened up this show, and we're going to pick through the ones that we seem to think that got the most kind of stirring comments and responses from the audience. And I think that what I'd like to do is actually start out with our inaugural guest. Her name was Lisa Drennan, and you remember her, of course, Pete.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, amazing person. She was actually a call girl in her beginning years of life, and ended up struggling with life, having children and everything, and having to support them. And she was very, very open and honest about her journey, and then ultimately where her journey took her, which is now as a certified counselor working with other people that have been caught up in the sex trafficking industry, abused women, people that are struggling to come through and to find an alternative to the life that they have been in so long. So, yeah, let's talk about Lisa for a little bit here, Pete. I first came into contact with her about 3 years ago. She was a Facebook account, and we became friends. And over the course of the 3 years, she started downloading her story to me. And I found it to be not only intriguing, but very encouraging, because here's a person that really went through some hell, a couple near-death experiences. She was actually controlled by pimps and later went to work in the brothels in Nevada. And then later and ultimately, thank God, was able to break away from that industry and go into getting certified to helping other people. So what's your take on that, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the crisis victory transformation, I think she's the perfect place to start. Here's a person that had been devalued. She had talked about that story of being forced to wait outside while her relationship, her boyfriend, her husband, whoever that person was, went and had sex with another woman, and she was so cast back and lived this life of sexual sale of her own body, but now has managed to get past that and is now looking to try to help women who either prevent or reduce the amount of damage they take in a similar vein. It's remarkable to build yourself back up to that point where you believe you have enough value to take on something as hard as that. Because that's not how this. That's not gentle work. You look at what you have to go through day to day to do what you do. You could easily quit and be like, I've done enough. Anytime you could do that, right? Anytime Lisa can do that, but she continues to go forward. So you have this massive rise in value in Lisa's life. And you do it because you do get a girl off the streets. Even if it's temporarily, she fails, you can do it again and again and again. And you're just constantly making efforts to save someone.
That is her ambition for sure. And, to this day, Lisa and I keep in touch, and I watch her progression and her growth, and I'm just so proud of her. And she lives down in Oregon, just south of Portland. And one of these days, I'm going to leave Seattle. I'm going to go down. And I'm going to spend a day with her and really get to go into her programs and take a look at her institutions. And with that being said, I kind of like to jump over to Tim McBride, if that's okay with you. Are you ready?
Oh, sure. Tim's great.
Tim is the saltwater cowboy. And back in the era that I was an international smuggler, Tim was a smuggler and operational at the same time. He was working with loads coming out of Colombia when I was working with the cartels in Mexico. And what I thought, Pete, was the highlight of our interview was the difference between the smuggling companies that we were in fact involved with, where mine was extremely violent, hostile, literally lethal at times. He didn't have any of those kind of conflicts at all. And this guy was moving 15 to 30 tons of marijuana at a time. And I I can't get over how he was able to stay in such a mellow state of being when he's being moving so much weight and so much money. But he did it. And what he did, he stayed with marijuana, where in our industry in the late 70s, cocaine became introduced. And of course, that was when the violence really took an uptick in our industry. Any reflection?
Yeah, well, first off, it was great to connect with him through Ben Bartlett. Tim is a great guest. He's definitely loquacious and has a lot of great stories, and he, you know, he he's such an interesting dude. By the way, 30 tons, like we say that word like it,
Yeah.
is like no big deal, but when you realize that that's like what an MRAP weighs.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
that's a mobile tank, and so you're talking about a lot of weight and for generations these guys were doing this, and so it's just interesting to hear him be a calm guy who accepts what he did, knows that he's not supposed to do that kind of thing anymore, and just a real
Yes.
transformation from this guy who was a smuggler of the first order again to someone who's peaceful and at peace with it and did his time and
Yeah.
all of that. The difference, like you said, between the violence and his sort of laid back Florida style. I mean, they had a machine that worked so good. If you were on the other end and these things, so
Oh, yeah.
if you were running the cartel and you had a guy moving 30 tons, 60 tons, however 20 tons reliably over and over again, I'm going to leave that dude alone.
Yeah. And protect him.
And protect him. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
huge asset, right? And
Yeah,
so
he never really went into protection or any of that when we were doing the interviews with him, but you could tell that he was really motivated to get it out into the media world, to share the experience. He's written books. He's been approached on doing a movie about his life. He's had been on talk shows. He's had a lot of exposure, and I think that his direction with this exposure is good because he's not glorifying it. He's letting people know what he survived, how that no longer exists in his life. And the benefit of having gone through that life is the wisdom that was acquired as a result that may deter or benefit others who may or may not be caught up in a similar situation. So my hat's really off to him. I really enjoyed Tim's time with
I want to say one more thing about this too, because there is an interesting thing with his story. And I don't know if we're going to bring him up, but your friend who's a grower up in Northern California in the Green Triangle days. But a lot of this was the illegality was a product of the time, not of the action. Because now it's like, oh, grow all the weeds you want. Not everywhere in the nation, but grow all the weeds you want. Even if it's illegal here, we're going to decriminalize it, not even punish it. And so all of you guys who were doing that stuff ended up being on the correct side of the law, but you had to be outlaws. And there are so many things in life when you're in survival mode. I call it extra legal. We're like, maybe that's illegal and everything, but this is you surviving and you're not trying to harm anybody. You're just trying to get along to the next thing. And that reality, that's tough because you're doing something they're like, I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just moving this thing that people want. They can smoke it, and sure, maybe you shouldn't smoke as much weed as you want, but weed's not hurting as many people as alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. And as you well know, I knew Greg Shipp for over 50 years, and that's a person in play that we're discussing at this point. And he was one of the founding fathers of the actual Emerald Triangle in Trinity County, Humboldt County, Mendocino County, California. And the time that I became involved with that was also in the 70s. And a lot of guys were coming back from Vietnam and they were not able to fit back into society and found that as an alternative lifestyle. And I remember full well how they would be up there setting perimeter defense lines and booby trapping trails and all of these really insane things looking back on it now, on more concerned about ripoffs than they were about the law. Because at that time, everybody and their mother was fleeing from different states, coming to Northern California to see the green dream come true. So as a result of that, you and I kind of handled that interview. Greg wasn't available at the time, but kudos to Greg because a lot of the information that I conveyed in the interview that day was relevant to my relationship in the 50 years that I've known Greg. Another one that I'd like to...
Before we move past that, I want to talk about guys like you and Greg Shipp, and what it took to do those things. When I came back, I wasn't allowed to be professionally relevant. I had to go
Interesting.
invent a new way to live, and so I became a handyman. I'm not particularly handy. I became handy, but I had to find a way to make money because no one would even interview me for a job. And if they
Interesting.
did want to interview me, it would be for a job that I was overqualified for. And so when I did get interviews, I quite often heard these words, "Oh, we can't afford you," and I'm like,
Wow.
"Well, I can't afford not to work. So what are we going to do?" And so when you got dudes like me, like you, that have been to Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and I've been shot at, I just don't fear the police. I don't fear authority, in a way that a regular person would. So of course
Yeah,
you
we didn't
guys,
either. We didn't
right?
either.
That's
I
what I'm
get
saying.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so part of that recovery comes in like I compelled to do this thing that you all think is illegal. And I'm going to be more cognizant of security. I'm not going to try to harm. They're going to try to do it in the way. Look, there's a lot of people that have done a lot of bad things. No one succeeds in bad behavior, but that environment causes you to act in a different way because we come from a different reality once you've been shot at and been on patrols or been
Exactly.
mortared. I mean, most people, if they were mortared as often as I was, I don't know about you, but we were mortared all the time, and my vehicle I was driving was hit by a mortar, right?
Yeah.
And so when you
Wow.
have that experience and you come home and someone wants to tell you, "Oh, well, you're not whatever. We're not even going to pay attention to you."
Yeah.
I was basically ignored when I came back. I know that for sure happened to you and your peers from Vietnam. What am I supposed to do?
Well, my time in military was different than yours. I was stationed in Germany, but when I got into the
Mm,
life and death lifestyle, I did 15 years with the Sinaloa drug cartel, first as a smuggler, and then in later years setting up distribution stateside for them. At one point,
mm,
I ended up in prison, was recruited out of prison by the Department of Justice, and spent 17 years operational and undercover in several foreign countries. And as you're well aware, and having known me as well as you do, I've been kidnapped, tortured. I was actually captured in Central America and held as a prisoner down there for quite a while. So I've survived a lot of near-death situations. I've witnessed executions. I've seen a beheading. I've seen people with gas poured on them and lit on fire. I've seen people bound and dumped in the back of trucks and taken out in the desert and being shot. I've seen people. I watched a man eaten by 3 dogs one time, just as a lesson in our life. So when you talk about leaving a traumatic environment and then recalibrating your life to come back into the norm, Jesus, I had 35 years of living in hell, literally. And
yeah,
the 17 years I did as an undercover operative for the Department of Justice was was very, very volatile in regard
sure.
to don't get caught. And that used to be the motivating factor in my mind. And then, of course, on 2 occasions I was. So I can really relate to what you're saying about coming out of that world and entering the norm, the normal world,
Mm,
and how we don't qualify for so many things, or in fact, we are overqualified. What I
yeah,
did
yeah.
immediately after termination of that was I became a state licensed private investigator. I decided to take the benefit of 17 years of being an undercover operative and using that intelligence gathering resource to rebuild a life. But then the desire, if you will, and the cause, the calling that came to me through my ministry years was to document and record that journey, and not for glory or for pride, but because I felt that history was so important, and that maybe, just maybe, the story of sin to redemption could salvage somebody else's life down the road. And as you full well know me, this has always been my desire. And also the payback. When you've lived a life like I lived, where I was outside of the law for so many years, when the decision was made to walk in, turn my life around, do my prison time, come out and be recruited by the Department of Justice to pay back, it was always important to me because I don't think or believe that saying I'm sorry is enough. I think that we need to show we're sorry, and then we need to take that knowledge and we need to benefit society as a result of what we've survived. But
Mm.
talking about survival, there was a police officer that you and I interviewed that 50% of his body was burned up, and
Jason
he,
Schechterly. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely amazing story. And you talk about someone that survives an extreme crisis event and then turns it around and literally on a global scale goes out as a speaker showing people that you can get through anything in your life and become
Mm,
better for it. And I'd like to talk about him a little bit if we could right now.
Please.
Well, you were the one that introduced me to him. You had nothing but the highest regard for him. And I got to tell you, Pete, when we got him on the show, I was absolutely overwhelmed with him by the end of his interview. Such courage, such bravery, such a lack of holding others responsible when they were the one that caused his car to explode and burn him literally alive.
Right.
And he never carried ill will against any of that. Instead, he took what had happened to him and he made the decision to go forth on a humane scale. And to this day, he's still out there in the public forum speaking and showing the world that you can, in fact, become better after surviving a critical crisis event. Comments?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people in this world that I've discovered through my show, and that's why I brought Jason to you, but they have this calamitous thing happen. This thinking about a guy right now who we may get on the show. He was a military guy and he went blind. And he's like, I'm a better person now because of it. It forced him to adapt and deal with who he was. And he didn't like who he was now that he's somebody bigger and better. And so he lost his sight. Yeah, Jason is burned alive, right? And they thought they were doing a recovery mission on Jason. He was so burned alive, but they actually, he smelled like charcoal. He was people don't understand. He was 4th degree burns. Yeah. And so when these guys get out and they're like, thank goodness I had that experience because look at who I am and what I am now. That's a remarkable transformation.
You and I are no different. Look at what we do today. We bring these podcast shows to the forum because we want people to hear about stories that end up with a positive action at the end of the story. So this is kind of like our recovery in that sense too. And I really like that. Another one that I'd like to talk about today, if we could, would be what about Brooke Urich, the sugar daddy?
Oh, Brooke's wonderful.
What an amazing story. And I loved her book, by the way. I'm going to hold it up while we're doing this interview.
I'll do the same thing.
Yeah, Brooke sent us her books. They're just, there you go. Hi, Brooke. How you doing? I hope you get to see this show. I've read the book. I absolutely love the book. It's just amazing. And what a story of a girl when she was young and maneuvered through the sex trade industry. How she not only came out of that, but was able to sit there. And I mean, she's even spoken before Congress, I believe, didn't she, Pete?
Yeah. Well, because there's a lot of interest in the website, using the website to commit crimes, but not having fault with the website. Right. Because of the way the law is structured, right? And so they're trying to figure out how to wrap their arms around sex trafficking, and we often dismiss this thing, but the definition for sex trafficking, is pretty permissive to say, hey, that was sex trafficking. And you're like, I'm just doing whatever activity. And so, she's testified in front of Congress and written this book, and there's legal cases going on all the time that involve her experience, and partly because she's really a whistleblower is what it is.
And she became a consultant, and she's become a consultant as a result of that. It was really an honor to do her story. I was very impressed with that young lady, and I love her positive direction with what she had survived, what she had been through, and to not carry anger or animosity towards the men that had abused her, the people that put her on that path. Rather, she gained wisdom from it and decided to exploit that industry so that industry would become public knowledgeable to the public. And as a result, like you said, she's in hearings and she does that kind of work. And she's been on talk shows. I mean, she's really put herself out there, and hats off to her. Just
she amazing. And I are working on a movie, trying to make a movie from her story. And it's the story is just great. It's sexy. It's fun.
Yeah.
And it's hard to believe, right? And there's another side
to that. All of ours.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, that's the crazy thing. So one of the things too is that we, in a lot of ways, you can look at this website and say, thank goodness it's there, not to celebrate trafficking, but you have people that are like, I'm struggling to find a way to find a girlfriend or whatever it is. And so, yes, there's some fantasy involved, but you've got people that like, I just need a shot. How do I get a shot at talking to a pretty girl, and they, because look, not everybody is as suave and as debonair as you and I when it comes to talking to the ladies. And so there is the aspect where you're like, this is a matchmaking service, and not all of it is bad. It's just that bad things are allowed and
Yeah.
encouraged to happen on there. And there's a difference there. And so we can't lose sight of the fact of the good that connecting people can have. And so these guys who are wrapped up in this thing have their own kind of damage from whatever. A lot of these guys are there because they were abused in some way when they were young and haven't been able to deal with it. So it's not just the ladies, but there's also the use and harm that's happened to all the clients on the website.
Yeah, I was glad that she made that awareness prevalent to all of us out here that did get a chance to hear her story, because it
Mhm.
is true. It isn't always the women that are victimized. You're right. You're absolutely right. A lot of men come out of very, very damaging relationships with the woman, and they seek comfort elsewhere. And this is
Mhm.
what would be the weapon, that, if you will, that drew them into these type of environments. But yeah, I'm glad you put her name up there and how to get a hold of her. Brooke, we love you. God bless you. Great interview. And just so proud of what you're doing out there with it, girl. You're going to do fine.
Yeah.
Now, another person I'd like to talk to about today would be Pete Polis. If you remember his interview we did, Pete, he was amazing. He had cartel ties to doing what I would call mid-level narcotics trafficking. And he's over in the Eastern Washington area. And after he did his time and went through paying his debt to society, Pete Polis decided to put together halfway houses in his area. And I believe, didn't he have like 5 of them?
Yeah, he had a good number of them. He's been
Yeah.
really successful with that. He took that entrepreneurial spirit of being a smuggler dealer and turned it into how do you help people recover.
You're exactly right. And I'm just really proud of Pete. I mean, his journey was a journey where so many people don't find a way out of it. Having lived as an international smuggler and trafficker myself, it's extremely hard to break away from that. It's not just because of the money, it's because of the level of the lifestyle that it takes you to. And there's power that comes with that. There's uh, it's a false pride, but you start feeling proud that you're still alive, surviving the game and in the game, if that makes sense to anybody out there. It would to you because you're a former spy. You've been outside the wire. You know what I'm talking about. How you get there and you go, God almighty, I survived another day of this stuff.
Yeah. I'm looking around like, oh, how did that happen?
Yeah. Another one we should talk about today too would be.
Wait, let me say this about Pete Polis.
Go ahead.
Too.
Yeah, bring him up.
He had a budding career in baseball, and then that went sideways. And so now he's
Yes.
got to redefine his life, right? So he went from a guy who thought he was going to be in the major leagues. Whether that was ever possible or not doesn't matter. To him, it was. And then his talent and his desire reached a ceiling where he couldn't get, and he got way up there. Like people often dismiss the minor leagues, but the fact is that's
he was on the
successful.
threshold. He was
right
there.
And then when you find something else that you're good at, in this case dealing drugs, how do you walk away from that? Like if you have success in something, how many of us are like, well, it's time to go, even if it's illegal? Like you're making money, you'll worry about the consequences later, but today, right now, what's he going to do? Go work at Arby's? Like no, he's not going to do that because
but he did sell used cars.
Well, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
I mean, he what he did is reconstruct a foundation staying in sales, and he found a way to take benefit of that knowledge from his criminal past.
That's true.
And that was a catapult that got him into where he's at today. And we're hollering out to you, Pete. We both have nothing but love and respect for you. Great job you're doing out there, buddy. And just keep doing with it and keep us posted, okay? That's important. Now, the other one I wanted to bring up today also was Deb Radcliffe, the cyber lady. And she's written 3 books. Hi, Deb. I hope you get to see this. She was just remarkable in her many, many years of being a criminal journalist in the cyber warfare industry. And I thought her interview was absolutely fascinating. And if I understand it, Pete, she's working on a 4th book, correct?
Yeah. I mean, she's not going to stop writing. That's what she does. And so she's got her teeth into a story that only seems to get bigger. And again, when you see these things happening and you're the reporter, you still take damage. You're still you care about these people. You have to put down that story at some point. But when the story keeps coming back and demanding more of you, it's no different than Pete Polis in that she's good at this, and she has to go into something that she knows that harms her, but she has to tell that story because if not her, who will?
And I remember, Pete, when we were interviewing her, that one of the things she was saying was she would look at where it would be in 5 years, talking about artificial intelligence, talking about technological advancement in spyware and things to this nature. And then at the end of the interview, she is saying, I was so wrong. We're looking at maybe just 2 years and we're going to be into this situation. And the real concerns that we all have with AI and where AI is taking itself to now, because although it is not quite yet self-aware, that's on the horizon. And once it becomes self-aware, what are we as a society going to do? Because we know that history shows everything evolutionary tends to remove the lesser of the strength of the stronger societies and replaces it with themselves. So, do we in fact have a Terminator scenario coming in the near future or not? I guess time will tell us. Yeah, you remember a couple of weeks ago when we did Jeffrey Mark?
Oh, sure, Jeffrey.
God, yeah, I absolutely loved his interview. Now, there's a guy that went through radical child abuse, and look at where he took his life after he came out of that entire environment. And I know it still carries with him because throughout the conversation, you could actually feel some of the painful moments as he would be reliving what he survived in the past and the prejudices that were aligned against him as a result of life choices, on and on. And even the famous people he knew in his life, like Lucille Ball and all of these as he came up in life, and the influence and the impact that each one of them had on him, encouraging him to continue to go further in the industry that we're all now involved with, which is the media industry. And I'd love to hear some of your comments about him.
I don't know if he mentioned it in the show, and I usually don't bring this up because it's got to be heavy for him, but he was there when John Lennon was shot.
I thought he did bring that up. That might have been off air, but I do remember that comment made. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yes, it's John Lennon, and that makes it probably heavier than just some random person getting shot. But anytime you witness somebody's demise, there's a cost for that. So in addition to the abuse that he suffered and the jealousy that his parents had for him and his success and everything, he also has these other, like all of us, we have these moments in our lives where there's, through no fault of our own, this damage that you're given. And imagine that, like if you might have done something else and saved John. I mean, here's this treasure that are thousands of videos on YouTube about John Lennon. People talk about him all the time. And
we'll always love him. We keep him alive in the memory. I get that. One of the things too was like when he came out about his homosexuality. When he first came out with that was at a time when it was not only not popular, but it was almost dangerous to discuss that in public. And yet, I looked at his courage in our interview and Mark, kudos to you, brother. Always speak the truth of your life. Never be ashamed of the choices you make, because those are the choices that you find that you have to live with. And tell you what, I'd actually like to interview you again someday. Your story was fascinating to me.
Jeffrey's great. He's a nice guy. I dig him.
Yeah, thank you for introducing him to me. I really enjoyed having him on the show. I'd like to talk quickly too, if we could, about Koji Stephen Sakai.
Koji, okay, yeah.
Yeah, he's a movie producer that's working on My Life Story with a co-producer right now. But Koji, we got him on the air because he was right in the middle of the LA fires. And during that time, he was being descriptive about like driving home and all of a sudden a 55-gallon drum on fire flew across the road in front of him. And he's frantically trying to get a hold of his wife to make sure she's okay. And he's got his son in the car with him, so he knew he was safe in that moment. But the impact that the fire had, which was absolutely catastrophic and nearly apocalyptic, if you will, in the Los Angeles area. And you're down there yourself, Pete. You're in that neighborhood. So you know how that affected and impacted, and will probably be an impact for years to come. The complete obliteration of Pacific Palisades, the Altadena fire. It's just remarkable that we didn't have something to protect that much of society in play. So when something like that happens, that there are protective devices that would come up, but they weren't. They were literally caught with their pants down. And on your standpoint of seeing it every day on the news and knowing those neighborhoods and those communities so well, how did that impact you?
Well, I know people that lost homes.
Yeah,
and,
I know.
we all have our treasures. They may not be worth anything to anybody else. And in this case, it's Hollywood, not Hollywood proper, but the whole region. And so there's all kinds of priceless things that are actually valuable to other people too, and someone that Ben Bartlett and I both know, a guy named Harlan, he's a PR person, and he's represented everybody. I mean, just everybody. He represented Don Wells, who was Marianne on Gilligan's Island. He still represents Bob Hope, right? Very connected and successful. This house burned to the ground, and everything, they were able to get a couple of things out, but not things that were so precious to them. And these are the things that, when you have a fire like this and you get into the warning zone, we've been there, right? Our house is never going to burn down. It's nowhere near where a fire is going to be until the second where you get that, hey, you guys are on alert. Just be ready in case we need you to get all the way ready. And all of a sudden you realize that fire is that close to us, right? Even though we don't live anywhere near where the fire is, it only takes a mile.
Yeah.
A mile.
Yeah.
When there's a giant fire, all of a sudden it becomes real close.
Well, so, as you know, before I went to Folsom Prison during my time in the California system, I worked at a firefighting camp. It was the beginning of my 3-year tour, and I was in San Luis Obispo. So I've actually been on the front lines of those fires, and I do know what the Santa Ana winds can do. And they're absolutely, the fire is upon you in mere seconds, not minutes. And to scramble and stay alive becomes more of the important factor at that moment than it does to try and fight down or suppress a line. So, when we were talking to Kyoji about it, he was on alert because the fire was so close to where he lives at. And at any moment, he could have been pulled. But fortunately for him, in that regard, they were okay. But he did state that his son plays softball. And he stated about how I think it was 4 of the families that had fellow players on his team lost their homes completely, and how it just so devastatingly rearranged their lives in an instant. I just thought that was an interesting interview because he's Hollywood.
You can realize how ill-prepared you are for a fire when a fire shows up, and you have 2 hours. 2 hours from you've got to grab everything that's valuable to you and get out of your house. Your neighborhood is going to get hit. 2 hours. That's what you've got. And if you don't have a pickup, if you don't have time to go get a rent U-Haul, you're talking whatever boxes you can stuff into your car and where are you going to take it? Because you don't know where you're going to be that night.
Where are you going to take it? What a good point, because there were literally hundreds of thousands of people uplifted in a moment's notice. And did you know anybody down in Pacific Palisades? Did you?
Sure, I know all kinds of people that are down there. I know people that have lost homes in Malibu too.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. The devastation. There were homes on Malibu on the beach that likely will never be rebuilt.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, here one day, gone the next, and I mean, gone. And you're right. The permits and zoning permits and things are all different today than they were.
These were enormously valuable places 2 months ago, and now they don't even exist. And so that might have been that person's well-being, was tied up into that house, And so it's one thing to say, oh, you got a house in Malibu. Yeah, but I'm the 3rd generation. I inherited it, and I really I could never afford this house any other way. Yeah. And that's how you make your money, by renting these places out. And now all of that is gone. What does that person do?
Boy, you talk about having to start over from literally nothing, because you're right. A lot of the insurance companies I've been noticing are not even coming through or following through on people that have had policies for decades on their properties.
If they had a policy, a lot of the insurance companies had moved out because the risk was too high. So you have no insurance. You own that land, but will anybody let you develop on it? So even if you try to sell that dirt, which is worth a lot of money, right? Right now, it's got to be abated from all the chemicals that went into. I mean, it's just, and then what are you going to do now to 3 years from now when you can allow someone to buy?
Well, not only that, brother, but a lot of people are concerned about the fact that homes will not be replaced. Instead, all that land is being bought up for condominiums and other things. So the neighborhoods will never ever recover in that regard. And that's a sadness, because I've been to
think about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you need money and someone says, "I've got money, I'll buy that land sight unseen right now, as is where is. I'll buy that land." I don't blame anybody for selling out to somebody who's going to then do whatever they do. And so you're right.
They have
that
to rebuild life.
Going to be the same.
Exactly. That was
Yeah.
my point. And, okay, well, let's get into a really good one here, a positive one. You remember doing the interview with David Knies? He's a guy that
Oh
did,
yeah.
he did the story on Corporal Jason Dunham,
Yeah.
Congressional Medal of Honor winner. And although we got it posthumously, the story was so beautiful and so uplifting and so recognizable to so many of us veterans. The honor, if you will, that he was able to put that story together and be with the men that served with him during that time when that happened. And my God, that's an interview that will stay with me for the rest of my life. He, my hat's off to him. I understand that he got that. David Easey's got the documentary on that, and it's now out there in full action. I've seen it. You've seen it. Ladies and gentlemen, what was it? It was called The Gift.
The Gift, right?
Yeah, The Gift.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen it, folks, please see it. It really warrants an expertise of work that was done to honor this fallen hero. And I heard that he was going to be coming out here to Washington State here in the next month or so, and hopefully I'm going to get a chance to sit down with Dave and have a visit. And I just have such respect for him and the messages that he delivers to our world. He's a pretty amazing guy.
Yeah, he is an amazing guy, and the fact that he met Jason, and Jason had an impact.
How
on
weird
when Jason was when he was alive, right? Yeah, and so when he saw that he had passed, that began the rest of that journey for Dave. And he's a professional filmmaker and everything else, but he and the people from that unit, they're bound together now. There's just no escaping.
Forever.
And that's part of the gift that Jason gave those guys that day. And this is what they continue to sort out is what is this gift that he gave us? It isn't just a guy who saved my life. It's all of these things that come with it.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful.
And by the way, they keep losing guys to suicide, right? So these guys are still like dealing with the havoc of war in general.
Well, it never leaves any of us that have been traumatized to that extent when you face combat, whether you're in uniform or out of uniform. Combat is combat. And when you survive it, it's lingering. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, we lose an average of 22 veterans every single day in the United States due to PTSD-related suicide deaths. 22 of us a day, brother. We've got to figure out a better way to take that problem on. So if any of you veterans are out there thinking of those thoughts and you're contemplating it, a year ago, I almost committed suicide myself. The jungle just never seemed to leave my memories, and I just got tired of waking up in the middle of it every single night and every day. And Pete, he has the same thing. He was PTSD affected also. And our advice to you is call the Veterans Hotline. We have a suicide hotline that's very effective. That's what I did. And I've never had the impulse again. They got me treatment immediately. It was an excellent doctor that was on staff at the Seattle VA who was very, very, he'd been 18 years, I believe, at that time working with veterans like you and I that still carry the shadows of those nightmares within us.
Yeah.
So our hearts and prayers certainly go out to all of you brothers and sisters that are dealing with those kind of thoughts. So don't let them happen. Take action. Call the Veteran Suicide Hotline and save a life. And if you know anybody going through that type of stress or trauma, be attentive, be alert, be aware, keep an eye on them, talk to them, discuss with them if they will open up. But unfortunately, as Pete and I know, there's so many things that we talk about within ourselves and with our own ranks, only with people that have been through what we've been through.
Yeah.
And, when I lost Captain Robert 2 Novembers before last to suicide, he was the last out of 7 of us that were recognized as men captured and tortured and rescued on foreign soil in the service of our country. And over the 21 years since we all received that award together at Seattle, I'm the last man standing out of all 7 of us. So I try to keep them in memory and in thought and keep them alive that way every day. But anyway, I really encourage people to see that documentary, The Gift. Absolutely amazing story. And Pete, your memory of it's a lot stronger than mine. I noticed when you were sharing that just now, that some of the comments that you were making were really important to be said. Look at the brotherhood that was formed as a result with all of them, David Knies and those guys that survived that day. And
yeah.
and his parents, the family, and Yeah.
One of the things that happens in these situations is, so you haven't met Trent Gibson, but he was the commander that day. And when you are a commander of a unit that has this kind of severe trauma, you own those guys. You're in command of that group of people for the rest of your life.
Yes.
You don't get
of
to
course.
just walk away from it. The last guy to command the USS Indianapolis, the submarine, that guy owns that Indianapolis community, which is now all down to one person and then all of their family that are part of that. And that's 80 years ago that happened, right?
Isn't
And
that
so
amazing?
it is amazing. And so
Yeah.
the last guy, Harold Bray, is still left, and
Wow.
but then it's sons and grandsons and great grandsons and daughters and wives. All of these people are part of a community. And the guy who's the commander Tost, he is the guy that he ran the last USS Indianapolis, and so
Oh,
he can't get rid of that command. That command is his. He belongs to
yeah.
these people, and they belong to him, and they need a leader, and so he is the guy that does that. And Trent Gibson is going to be that guy for his unit, because
Yes.
that did something to that body of men that bound them in a way that is not going to change.
I absolutely love the way you just explained that. Boy, that was just so clear and so perfect, Pete. And I get that. We both of us have been active military, so we know what it's like to have the respect of and the dignity and the honor that a commanding officer conveys to his men. Well, it's why we're on the subject talking about Marines. We've got to talk about Richard Caruso. Now, Richard,
love Richard Caruso.
yeah. I love him too, man. Him and Phyllis are just amazing. But Richard was a guard working in the SHU program at Corcoran back in the early 90s. And Corcoran State Prison in California at that time was the most dangerous prison that we had in the state. Excuse me. Now, I'm a former prisoner from Folsom Prison. I was in there in the 1980s, which was a rock and roll era of time to be in those kind of prisons. But Richard Caruso's story is so good and so amazing. They actually made a movie based on his life called The Felon. I mean, go ahead and share some of it, brother. This is a really good topic to wrap up our show with today. Richard Caruso, Security Housing Unit Officer, that's called SHU program. And what he did was at great risk to his own life. And I literally say this with conviction, by other guards. He blew the whistle on everything going on where they were matching convicts against convicts in their battles, some of the battles all the way to the death. So if you ever get a chance to see that movie, The Felon, that's a pretty graphic image of just exactly what Richard had to deal with and survive with himself. And I myself, when I was in Folsom Prison, was involved in a yard stabbing. I had no choice. I needed to stay alive. As a result of that, I ended up in the security housing unit for some months. So I know exactly what environment that he came in, that came into play in Richard Caruso's life. And let me tell you something, folks. The people that are in the SHU programs are in there for a specific reason. 90% of that population is in there to be separated from the rest of us. In my case, I was involved in a violent action and I got put in the hole. But there's people that are living out decades in there. And that's what Richard Caruso had to go to work and deal with every single day. But as a result of him stepping forward in that courageous way that he did and taking on an unjust system, he not only saved lives, but he gained the respect of convicts such as myself that were high-tier convicts, so to speak, gang leaders, things to this nature. The word got out. The word got out what Richard had done for all of them. And as a result of that, he was honored on both sides. And so you want to add to that?
I think what folks, when you talk about a movie being made, they told it from the point of view of an inmate, but there was a whole different movie that's completely legitimate where he took on systems.
Yes.
And because you took on a system and needed a bigger system to take that on. And so he took on the Department of Corrections is a tight-knit group, and you do not stick your head up because it'll get chopped, right?
Oh, so you bet.
Like you don't speak out. You don't, if you want to not talk to somebody, get a hold of their public affairs officers at a prison.
That's almost funny.
And then the prison system itself, and then the local government and the local police, then the FBI, all of these people at some point turned on Richard. And
Yes.
because he kept records, he kept the receipts, because his lawyer is like, no, I recorded that phone call. I remember exactly what you said. He was able to keep Richard just a step ahead of what they were trying to do, because the shame was on all of these systems. And so it really is a thriller, where they were out to get him. He was in car chases, and everybody chasing him was a law enforcement person.
Yeah, it was.
He's coming after a guy who's like, hey, what's going on here is illegal. It's bad. And so the story's heavy. So everybody should watch The Felon. That movie's great. But also, I'm hoping to get him a very good screenplay so that we can take that thing to market, because what he deserves is to have his story told. Because
absolutely, I agree.
Here's how dirty California was. They ended up paying Richard millions of dollars to shut up and go away, because they knew they had a real problem, and how they did him made their problem worse. And so they're just like, we're going to pay you to please stop. That's how dirty this whole thing was.
He deserved everything they paid him and more, in my opinion. But talk about the heart of a former Marine going into that type of environment and carrying his honor and his dignity and his loyalty unto himself as a result of being that Marine. Because, as you know, brother, once a Marine, they're always a Marine. And
right.
I tell you, I love Richard for what he did, and being a former prisoner that's been through the system back in the hard years in California. Man, I mean, he did put his life on the line for those of us that were in there, just trying to do our time, get through what we had to get through to get back to the real world. So I think today this is a great place to wrap this interview up. I just love.
I got a little something to say to you. You gave me such nice kudos in the beginning. I want to remind you, man, that on Podcast Mountain, you're just getting started. Just getting going on, and we're making things happen. But to get to 10 episodes puts you almost in the first percent, and now we're at 20, and I've got people lined up for you that are going to blow your mind. You've got people you're lining up that are going to blow our minds. And so there's so much more to do here. And you're really doing something incredible. We're already about 10% of the way on YouTube without even trying very hard, right? Just on the strength of the shows, 10% of the way to monetization, and that's going to be here before we know it, because the content is good and it's resonating with people. And this is to you and to Victor, who are like, hey, we're going to invest in this thing and make it happen. And so it's happening. It's really working. And the other thing I would say to you is I've got a great guest coming up. His name is Ron Self, and recon Marine, badass dude.
Love it.
He got lost and ended up involved in we'll just say like a murder for hire type situation.
Yes. And
he was like, I know what I was doing was wrong, but there was no stopping it. I'm on a freeway with a wreck, and I'm going to go kill someone, on purpose. And so
I'm dying to hear that interview.
Yeah. He went to jail. He tried to kill himself by hanging himself, and the fucking rope broke.
Wow.
If that isn't a message from the big fella saying, hang on there, guy, So it's an amazing story. And he deservedly got a heavy sentence for what he did, but he got out, and boy, oh boy, has he had a crisis victory. So there's all kinds of great stuff coming up, and I want everybody to get excited about that, and ask everybody to subscribe. YouTube, Facebook, wherever it's going to be. We continue to add channels. We continue to add areas where you can get a hold of us. You can always reach Hal on Facebook. That's an easy way to do it. So if you have a crisis victory story to tell, we want to hear it. We want to publish it. Hal, now I'm done. I'll shut up and let you finish up.
Well, I just want to say, as I'm closing out this episode today, that I love you with all of my heart, Pete. Everything you've done for Victor and I to get this podcast show up and going. You know how important it is to us, because we want to share victorious stories of people that have survived extreme crisis events. And ladies and gentlemen, a man could never have a better co-host than Pete Turner. He's my brother, and you've got to see the Break It Down show. My God, he's got a couple thousand episodes out there. He's been doing this a long time. Yet he takes his time every single week to help me get this message out, because he knows how meaningful it is to me. So, Pete, thank you so much, and I appreciate it. And like Pete said, if you enjoy these, please hit like, share, and subscribe. Nice. God bless you all.
Okay, folks. Well, that wraps up another episode today, and I'd like to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for taking your time to catch our show. Now, if you like these shows, I would ask that you would please hit like, share, and subscribe. It's so important to us that we get these messages out, and we understand that these are graphic, almost toxic interviews. But this is the kind of impact that we feel is needed in order to make sure that people understand the significance of the problems that we are confronted within our own country and around the globe. So I'm going to say at this time that I love you all. God bless you all. Hasta luego, y vaya con Dios, and go Victors.